The great hall of Zentara Prime buzzed with confused voices as 300 alien species gathered for an emergency session. Council Speaker Vexthara stood at the center podium, her crystalline body glowing with nervous energy. The massive chamber that had seen countless debates and decisions now felt empty, despite being full of representatives. Harrison's chair sat empty in the human section. For 12 years, the patient diplomat had occupied that seat, always ready with a calm voice and practical solutions. His absence felt like a missing tooth, obvious and uncomfortable. The other council members kept glancing at the vacant spot, as if expecting him to walk in late with his usual apologetic smile and coffee cup. "The humans are gone," Vexthara announced, her voice echoing through the chamber. The translation devices carried her words to every species present. Every human colony, every space station, every diplomatic post stands empty. They left no message, no explanation, no trace of where they went. Ambassador Claxton of the Rigel Confederation leaned back in his seat, his forearms crossed in satisfaction. "Good riddance," he muttered loud enough for nearby delegates to hear. Always interfering in matters that did not concern them. But not everyone shared his relief. Senator Ulinow from the Outer Rim territories shifted nervously. Her homeworld had relied on human peacekeepers to maintain order among the fractious. Mining colonies? Without Commander Lisa Brooks and her small fleet, the region was already seeing increased pirate activity. The Galactic Medical Council's representative, Dr. Zephyr, spoke with worry in his translated voice. Dr. Peter Cole was working on a cure for the Zarian plague. His research could have saved millions across 17 star systems. His laboratory on Medical Station Alpha is sealed, and we cannot access his work without human biometric clearance. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The humans had integrated their security systems so thoroughly into galactic infrastructure that their sudden absence left gaps everywhere. Trade stations couldn't process certain transactions. Research facilities couldn't access critical data. Diplomatic channels that had run smoothly for decades suddenly faced communication barriers. How did they evacuate so completely without anyone noticing? Asked Ambassador Trelka from the inner worlds. Her insectoid features showed genuine puzzlement. They had settlements on over 400 worlds. The logistics alone should have taken months. Vexthara's glow dimmed. Our intelligence services are investigating. What we know is this: 3 days ago, human ships began leaving their positions across the galaxy. They moved in perfect coordination, as if following a predetermined plan. By yesterday, every human vessel had vanished from our sensors. The Zephyrian representative, General Mordak, slammed his clawed hand on his desk. This proves they were plotting against us. No peaceful species evacuates with such military precision. But Elder Sylvana from the ancient ethereal collective shook her head slowly. "I have lived for 800 years and served on this council for 2 centuries. The humans never showed aggression toward any species. Their evacuation pattern suggests retreat, not attack preparation." The debate that followed revealed how little the council truly understood about human contributions to galactic society. Representative after representative spoke up, realizing that humans had been quietly involved in almost every aspect of interstellar life. The Kepler Junction, a vital trade hub, was now undefended. Commander Lisa Brooks had stationed only 6 ships there, but they had kept piracy rates near zero for 8 years. Her diplomatic skills had prevented 3 separate wars between competing trade guilds. Now merchants were already reporting increased attacks and extortion attempts. The Galactic Banking Consortium's delegate revealed that human financial advisors had been managing currency exchange rates between dozens of species. Their economic models had prevented market crashes by predicting and correcting dangerous trends. Without their Expertise. Several smaller economies were already showing signs of instability. Engineer Mary Johnson had been overseeing terraforming projects on 12 worlds. Her innovative atmospheric processors had made barren planets habitable for multiple species simultaneously, something previously thought impossible. The projects were now running on automated systems that would eventually fail without human maintenance. They always seemed so eager to help, mused Ambassador Felix from the Centauri Union. Every crisis, every conflict, every natural disaster, humans volunteered assistance. We thought they were just showing off their technology. But it was more than technology. Humans had served as mediators in thousands of disputes. Their unique ability to understand multiple perspectives had made them natural peacemakers. Jake Harrison alone had prevented over 50 potential wars through patient negotiation and creative, compromise solutions. Dr. Robert Chun's work on Universal translation matrices had been advancing slowly through the galactic bureaucracy. His research promised to eliminate the communication barriers that still caused misunderstandings between species. The project had been underfunded and overlooked by the Council, despite its potential to revolutionize interstellar relations. As the emergency session continued, a disturbing pattern emerged. Time after time, human proposals had been delayed, dismissed, or ignored by the Council. Their offers to share technology freely were met with suspicion. Their willingness to help in crises was treated as interference. Their diplomatic solutions were considered naive idealism. We treated them like children, admitted Counselor Yexta from the Vegan Trade Alliance. Every time they proposed something, we found reasons to reject it. We said they were too new to the galaxy, too inexperienced to understand complex interstellar politics. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Many council members began remembering specific incidents where humans had offered help that was declined, or solutions that were ignored. Jake Harrison's patient explanations during budget meetings. Lisa Brooks' warnings about increased pirate activity that went unheeded until attacks actually increased. Peter Cole's requests for funding to study cross-species diseases that were deemed unnecessary until outbreaks occurred. They left because we made them unwelcome, Elder Sylvana said softly. We took their help for granted and gave them nothing but criticism in return. General Mordek snorted. If they were so valuable, why did they sneak away like thieves? Why not demand better treatment? But the answer to that question was already becoming clear to the wiser council members. Humans had tried to demand better treatment through proper diplomatic channels, through formal proposals, through patient explanation of their contributions. The council had responded with bureaucratic delays and condescending lectures about knowing their place in galactic hierarchy. As the session ended with no resolution and no plan to find the missing humans, the delegates dispersed to their quarters. With growing unease, the galaxy suddenly felt larger and more dangerous without the steady, quiet presence of humanity watching over it. In his private chambers, Vexthara stared at the reports piling up on her desk. Pirates attacking merchant vessels, border disputes escalating, medical emergencies going untreated, economic indicators showing dangerous trends. Problems that had been manageable with human assistance were now becoming crises. The humans had left as quietly as they had served, without drama or demands for gratitude. But their absence was already echoing through the galaxy, like a bell that would not stop ringing. 3 months had passed since the humans vanished, and the galaxy was beginning to show cracks like a dam under pressure. The Zephyrian Empire, sensing weakness, launched their first territorial expansion in 50 years. Their war fleets swept across the outer rim, claiming 3 mining systems that had been under neutral protection. General Mordek stood before the Galactic Council, his reptilian features twisted with what might have been satisfaction. The weak systems need strong leadership, he declared. If they cannot defend themselves, They deserve conquest. But Council Speaker Vexthara remembered when similar Zephyrian expansion had been attempted 8 years ago. Captain Alex Turner had arrived with just 5 human ships and somehow convinced both sides to negotiate. His small fleet had not fired a single shot, yet the crisis had ended with a peaceful trade agreement that benefited everyone. Now there was no Alex Turner, and the Zephyrians were taking what they wanted by force. The Kepler Junction had become a nightmare for merchant ships. Pirate attacks occurred daily, and the once busy trade hub was nearly deserted. Captain Rezak of the Merchant Spacers Guild stood before the council with visible anger. "Where are the peacekeepers?" he demanded. "My ships are being robbed and destroyed, and no one protects us." Commander Lisa Brooks had maintained order in that sector with remarkable efficiency. Her patrol ships had been vastly outnumbered by potential threats, but she had used intelligence networks and diplomatic relationships to keep the peace. Pirates had known that attacking merchants would bring swift and certain retaliation, not just from human ships, but from the local species that Brooks had convinced to work together. Without her careful balance of relationships, the various security forces in the region were fighting each other instead of the pirates. The Rigel Confederation blamed the Outer Rim Defense Force for inadequate patrols. The Defense Force accused the Confederation of harboring pirates in their territory. Meanwhile, actual pirates grew bolder with each successful attack. On the agricultural world of Verdonia Prime, the terraforming systems that engineer Mary Johnson had designed were beginning to fail. The atmospheric processors that had made the planet habitable for 5 different species were showing critical errors. Local technicians tried to repair them, but the technology was too advanced and integrated for anyone except humans to understand fully. Administrator Nelson from Verdania sent desperate messages to the council. "The oxygen levels are dropping." In the Sector 7 colonies, his reports warned, "if we cannot repair the atmospheric generators, we will need to evacuate 12 million people within 6 months. Mary Johnson had not just built the terraforming systems. She had created them to work in harmony with each planet's natural environment. Her designs were elegant and efficient, but they required someone who understood both the technology and the delicate ecological balance she had achieved. Without her knowledge, the repairs were like trying to fix a symphony with a hammer. The Galactic Banking Consortium was facing its worst crisis in 2 centuries. 3 major economies had collapsed within weeks of each other, triggering panic across dozens of star systems. Financial advisor Karen Lewis had predicted these exact failures in reports that the consortium had filed away and forgotten. Banker Yiltax frantically searched through Karen's old proposals, while his own economy teetered on the edge of disaster. Her financial models had seemed overly cautious at the time. Her warnings about currency speculation had been dismissed as human pessimism. Now her predictions were coming true with devastating accuracy, and no one understood her solutions well enough to implement them. The collapse started with the Vegan Trade Alliance, whose currency had been artificially inflated by speculation in rare minerals. Karen had warned that the bubble would burst when mining yields inevitably decreased. The alliance had ignored her advice to diversify their economy gradually. When the mines ran dry earlier than expected, their entire economic system crashed. Overnight, the ripple effects spread faster than anyone anticipated. The Centauri Union, whose economy was tied to vegan trade, found their currency worthless. The Rigel Confederation, which had loaned massive amounts to both systems, faced bankruptcy. Karen had mapped out these connections in detailed reports that now read like prophecies of doom. On the research station orbiting Nexus 7, Dr. Helen Martinez's laboratory stood empty while a plague spread through nearby systems. The Zarian virus had mutated into a form that could jump between species, something that had never happened before. Helen's research into cross-species immunity had been the galaxy's best hope for preventing exactly this scenario Dr. Sefier worked desperately with her incomplete notes, but Helen's research methods were too advanced for him to follow. She had been developing a universal vaccine that could protect multiple species simultaneously, an approach that other scientists had called impossible. Her holographic logs showed that she had been close to a breakthrough when the evacuation began. The plague spread from the Xerian homeworld to their trade partners, then to species that had never even been to Xerian space. Traditional quarantine methods failed because no one understood how the virus was adapting to different biological systems. Helen's research had mapped these adaptation patterns, but her data was locked behind human security protocols that no one could bypass. In the disputed territories between the Krogan tribes and the ethereal collective, old hatreds were boiling over into open warfare. For 30 years, Admiral John Parker had maintained an uneasy peace between the two species through a combination of military deterrence and diplomatic finesse. His strategy had been simple: make war more costly than peace, while ensuring that peace was profitable for both sides. The Krogans were natural warriors who respected strength above all else. John had earned their respect by demonstrating that human military tactics could defeat them even with inferior numbers. But he had also shown them that their warrior culture could be channeled into profitable security work, protecting merchant ships and colonial settlements. The ethereals were philosophical beings who valued wisdom and long-term thinking. John had appealed to their intellectual nature, showing them how war would damage both species for generations to come. He had facilitated cultural exchanges and joint research projects that gave both sides reasons to cooperate. Without John's careful management, both species reverted to their basic nature. The Krogans saw the ethereals as weak targets for conquest. The ethereals viewed the Krogans as barbaric threats to civilized society. Within weeks of the human departure, border skirmishes had escalated into full-scale war. The Council received reports of entire star systems being evacuated as the conflict spread. Refugee ships crowded into neutral territories while their worlds burned behind them. The economic cost was staggering, but the cultural damage was even worse. Centuries of slow progress toward interspecies cooperation were being destroyed in months of renewed hatred. Council Speaker Vex Thara stood in her private chambers, surrounded by crisis reports that grew worse each day. Every problem seemed connected to a human who was no longer there to solve it. The galaxy had functioned smoothly for so long that no one had noticed how much of that smooth functioning depended on human intervention. The irony was bitter. The same council members who had complained about human interference were now begging for someone to interfere in their crises. But the humans were gone, and the galaxy was learning the difference between unwanted help and desperately needed help. A full year had passed since humanity's departure, and the galaxy was drowning in chaos. The Xerian plague had spread to 17 star systems, killing millions of beings across dozens of species. In her sealed laboratory on Medical Station Alpha, Dr. Helen Martinez had left behind holographic recordings that revealed the true scope of what the galaxy had lost. Dr. Zephyr played the recordings for the Emergency Medical Council, his hands shaking as Helen's image appeared before them. She looked tired but determined, working late into the night on research that could have saved them all. The virus is adapting faster than we anticipated, her recorded voice explained. But I've found the pattern. Each species it infects gives it new genetic material to work with. The key is not to fight each adaptation separately, but to create a universal immunity that works across all biological systems. Her research notes showed breakthrough discoveries that the current medical teams could barely understand. Helen had been mapping the genetic commonalities between different species, finding universal biological markers that could be used to create vaccines effective across multiple alien physiologies. The work was revolutionary, decades ahead of current galactic medical science. "I'm close to a solution." Helen's final recording showed her just days before the evacuation. "The universal vaccine should be ready for testing within a month. If it works, we can prevent cross-species pandemics forever." The recording ended abruptly, leaving the medical council staring at empty air while people died across the galaxy from a plague that could have been stopped. Meanwhile, the war between the Krogan tribes and the Ethereal Collective had consumed 12 star systems. Admiral John Parker's strategic doctrines, discovered in archived military databases, revealed how he had maintained peace for 3 decades through methods that seemed impossible to replicate. General Tarak of the Krogan Defense Force studied John's battle plans with growing amazement. The human admiral had never actually fought the Krogans in a major battle, yet his strategic analyses showed he understood Krogan tactics better than most Krogan generals. More importantly, his plans revealed how he had convinced both species that war would cost them more than they could possibly gain. John had created a complex web of economic interdependence between the two species. Krogan warriors provided security for ethereal research stations. Ethereal philosophers taught strategic thinking to Krogan military academies. Each species had become so integrated with the other's economy that war would have bankrupted both sides within months. Without John's careful maintenance of these relationships, the economic bonds had dissolved quickly. Trust built over decades crumbled in weeks. Now both species were destroying the infrastructure that had made their cooperation profitable, ensuring that the war would leave them both weaker, regardless of who won. The Council's investigation teams had begun discovering problems they never knew existed. Detective Kate Foster had been tracking an interstellar crime syndicate for 15 years, slowly building cases against criminals who operated across species boundaries. Her files, finally accessed through emergency protocols, revealed a conspiracy that stretched into the highest levels of galactic government. Counselor Vexthara read Kate's reports with growing horror. The syndicate had been planning to destabilize governments across the galaxy, using economic manipulation and strategic assassinations to create chaos that would let them seize control of key trade routes. Kate had been quietly arresting their agents, disrupting their operations, and building evidence for prosecutions that would have ended the threat permanently. Her investigation had been so secret that even most human officials didn't know about it. Kate had worked alone, using her unique position as a human law enforcement officer to move between different species territories without suspicion. She had been trusted by everyone and understood by no one, which made her perfect for tracking criminals who thought they were beyond any single species jurisdiction. Now the syndicate was operating freely. Without Kate's interference, their plans were proceeding ahead of schedule. 3 minor governments had already been overthrown by what appeared to be popular revolutions, but were actually carefully orchestrated coups. The criminals were building power while the galaxy was distracted by wars and plagues. Environmental scientist Daniel Wright had left behind monitoring systems that were now screaming warnings across dozens of worlds. His early detection networks had been preventing ecological disasters for 20 years, but without his expertise to interpret the data, the warnings were being ignored or misunderstood. On the ocean world of Aquatica, Daniel's sensors had detected changes in the planetary ecosystem that indicated an impending collapse of the entire food chain. His automated systems were sending increasingly urgent alerts, but local scientists couldn't understand his complex environmental models. They saw numbers and graphs where Daniel would have seen a dying world that needed immediate intervention. The Aquaticans had always assumed their world was naturally stable. They didn't know that Daniel had been making tiny adjustments to their industrial processes for years, preventing pollution buildups that would have poisoned their oceans. His environmental interventions had been so subtle that no one noticed them, but they had been essential for keeping the planet habitable. Similar crises were developing on mining worlds where Daniel had been preventing toxic waste from contaminating water supplies, and on agricultural planets where his soil management programs had been maintaining fertility. His absence was like removing the foundation from buildings that looked solid but were actually held up by his constant, invisible work. Archaeologist Emma Stone had been protecting cultural treasures across the galaxy, and her absence was allowing irreplaceable artifacts to be destroyed or stolen. The ancient ruins on Forgotten Prime, which contained the only remaining records of an extinct civilization, were being stripped by treasure hunters who didn't understand the historical value of what they were destroying. Emma had maintained relationships with archaeological teams from dozens of species, coordinating excavations and ensuring that discoveries were shared for the benefit of all galactic civilizations. Her diplomatic skills had prevented wars between species who claimed the same archaeological sites, and her expertise had ensured that excavations were conducted properly instead of becoming destructive. Treasure hunts dot the Museum of Galactic Heritage received reports daily of priceless artifacts being sold on black markets. Entire ancient cities were being demolished by mining operations that didn't know they were destroying irreplaceable historical sites. Emma's protective networks, which had operated quietly for decades, had collapsed without her leadership as the year progressed. Council members began to understand that humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been its caretakers, quietly maintaining systems that everyone else took for granted. Their contributions had been so seamlessly integrated into daily life that their absence felt like natural disasters rather than the loss of skilled professionals. The realization was devastating. Every crisis the galaxy faced could be traced back to human expertise that was no longer available. Every problem that seemed unsolvable had been solved routinely by humans who had been dismissed as interfering idealists. The species that had been eager to see humanity leave were now desperate for their return, but the humans were gone, vanished as completely as if they had never existed. The galaxy was learning to live without the guardians it had never appreciated, and the lesson was proving more painful than anyone had imagined possible. The massive search fleet assembled at Zentara Prime was the largest joint operation in galactic history. Ships from over 100 species had volunteered for the mission to find humanity, driven by desperation as much as curiosity. Council Speaker Vexthara stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the fleet prepare for departure with a mixture of hope and dread. Admiral Kekstar from the Rigel Confederation commanded the search operation. His tactical screens showed the scope of their challenge. Humanity had lived on 437 worlds, operated 600 space stations, and maintained trade posts in over 1,000 systems. Every single location had been evacuated with military precision, leaving no clues about their destination. The first search teams returned with disturbing reports. On New Terra, the human colony world that had housed 12 million people, the evacuation had been so complete that even the flowers in the gardens had been carefully transplanted and removed. Personal belongings were gone, but the infrastructure remained intact and undamaged. It was as if the humans had simply faded away. Like ghosts, Lieutenant Commander Zelek led the investigation team on Harmony Station, humanity's largest space habitat. The station could have housed 2 million humans, but every apartment stood empty and clean. The waste recycling systems had been purged, the hydroponics gardens had been harvested completely, and even the artificial gravity generators had been serviced before departure. Someone had spent enormous effort ensuring the station was left in perfect condition. The investigators found their first real clue in the personal quarters of Lieutenant Colonel Sam Mitchell, the station's former security chief. Hidden behind a false wall panel was a data storage device containing encrypted files. When the Council's best codebreakers finally cracked the encryption, they discovered detailed records of every slight, every insult, and every dismissal that humans had endured over their decades in galactic society. Sam's files painted a devastating picture of systematic discrimination that the Council had never acknowledged. Human proposals for medical research had been delayed by bureaucratic procedures that never seemed to apply to other species. Human offers to share technology freely had been met with suspicion and accusations of hidden motives. Human attempts to mediate conflicts had been dismissed as naive interference from a species too young to understand galactic politics. The files contained recorded conversations from council meetings where human representatives weren't present. General Mordak bragging about how easy it was to manipulate the simple-minded humans into providing free assistance. Banker Yultax laughing about how humans were too trusting to charge proper prices for their advanced technology. Ambassador Claxton complaining that humans made other species look bad by comparison because they actually kept their diplomatic promises. On the diplomatic world of Concord, the search team found the personal quarters of Ambassador Jake Harrison. His rooms had been cleared of belongings, but investigators discovered a hidden compartment containing his private journals. The entries revealed the growing frustration of a dedicated diplomat who had spent 12 years trying to help species that seemed determined to reject his assistance. Jake's early entries showed enthusiasm and hope. He wrote about the potential for galactic cooperation and his excitement at representing humanity in such an important role. But as the years passed, his tone became more resigned. He documented meeting after meeting where his proposals were ignored, where his expertise was dismissed, where his attempts to prevent conflicts were treated as unwanted interference. The most painful entry was dated just 3 months before the evacuation. Jake had written about a private conversation with Elder Sylvana, who had told him that many council members saw humans as useful tools rather than equal partners. They want our help, Jake had written, but they don't want us to have opinions about how that help should be used. We're expected to provide solutions, but not to question why the problems exist in the first place. On the research world of Innovation Prime, diplomat Grace Wilson had left behind her own records of frustrated attempts to prevent wars. Her files showed a pattern of species coming to humans for help with conflicts, then blaming humans when the solutions required both sides to make compromises. Grace had prevented dozens of wars through patient negotiation, only to be accused of favoring one side or the other by whichever species felt they had given up more. Her final diplomatic report, found in the abandoned embassy, contained a bitter observation that would haunt the council for years. "We have become the parents of a galaxy full of children," Grace had written. "They fight constantly, then run to us to fix their problems. But instead of learning from our solutions, they resent us for showing them how to behave like adults. Perhaps it's time to let them grow up without us." The search teams made their most significant discovery on the industrial world of Progress, where historian Paul Adams had maintained the official human archives. His records were the most comprehensive documentation of human contributions to galactic society, and reading them was like discovering a completely different version of recent history. Paul had documented every human innovation that had been adopted by other species without credit. Atmospheric processors that were now considered standard terraforming technology had been invented by human engineers. Medical techniques that saved millions of lives annually had been developed in human laboratories. Even the improved hyperspace navigation systems that made modern interstellar travel possible had been created by human mathematicians. More damaging were Paul's records of how human achievements had been systematically minimized or attributed to other species. The Council's official histories mentioned human involvement in major breakthroughs only as footnotes, if at all. Paul had copies of documents showing how human contributions were edited out of scientific papers and diplomatic agreements, leaving other species to take credit for human work. But the most shocking discovery came from Paul's personal files about the evacuation itself. His records showed that humans had been planning their departure for over 20 years. The decision hadn't been made in anger or frustration, but through careful analysis of their treatment by galactic society. They had concluded, with scientific precision, that their help was genuinely unwanted. The evacuation plan was a masterpiece of logistics and diplomacy. Humans had gradually moved their most important research and cultural artifacts to secret locations. They had slowly reduced their dependencies on galactic infrastructure, while increasing other species' dependence on human services. When they finally left, they had ensured that the transition would be as smooth as possible for everyone except themselves. Deep space. Monitoring stations detected strange energy signatures in unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim. The readings were unlike anything in the databases, but they had characteristics that seemed familiar to human technology. Whatever the humans had found out there, it was apparently more appealing than staying in a galaxy that didn't appreciate their gifts. Ambassador Jake Harrison's final journal entry, discovered encrypted in the embassy's computer systems, contained the truth that the Council had been dreading. "We tried for 50 years to be good neighbors," he had written. "We shared our knowledge freely, helped solve problems we didn't create, and asked for nothing in return but basic respect. Instead, we were treated like servants who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve their betters. Today, we voted unanimously to find somewhere else to call home. The galaxy has made it clear that it doesn't need us, so we're going to find out what's beyond the edge of known space. Maybe out there we'll find someone who wants partners instead of tools." The search fleet returned to Zentara Prime empty-handed, but carrying the weight of devastating revelations. Humanity hadn't been driven away by a single incident or conflict. They had been worn down by decades of systematic disrespect, until leaving seemed like the only way to maintain their dignity. The galaxy had lost its guardians not through war or disaster, but through its own sustained ingratitude. 5 years had passed since humanity's departure, and the galaxy bore scars that might never heal. The great council chamber on Zentara Prime looked different now, with empty sections where species had once sat before wars and economic collapse, forced their withdrawal from galactic politics. Where once 300 species had gathered, barely half that number remained active in council affairs. Council Speaker Vexthara stood before the memorial statue that had been erected in the center of the chamber. The bronze figure depicted Ambassador Jake Harrison in his characteristic pose, hands clasped behind his back, face turned upward as if looking toward distant stars. The inscription below reads simply, "To those who served without recognition." But everyone knew it was humanity's memorial. The ceremony to unveil the memorial had been poorly attended. Many species boycotted the event, claiming that honoring the humans would be admitting fault for their departure. Others stayed away because they were too busy dealing with crises that human expertise might have prevented. The Zephyrian Empire had refused to participate, with General Mordak declaring that memorializing deserters would encourage other species to abandon their responsibilities. But Elder Sylvana had attended, her ancient form moving slowly to place a crystal flower at the statue's base. "I have lived through 8 centuries of galactic history," she had said in her speech. "I have seen species rise and fall, watched empires grow and crumble, witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. Never have I seen a species give so much and ask for so little in return. Never have I seen such a profound failure of wisdom as our treatment of humanity." The wars continued to rage across multiple sectors. The conflict between the Krogan tribes and the Ethereal Collective had spread to encompass their respective allies, creating 2 massive military blocs that consumed resources and lives with each passing day. Admiral John Parker's peacekeeping strategies were studied desperately by military academies, but no one could replicate his combination of strength and diplomacy that had maintained peace for 3 decades. Economic collapse had claimed 6 major civilizations in the past year alone. The Galactic Banking Consortium had tried to implement some of financial advisor Karen Lewis's emergency protocols, but without understanding the underlying principles, their efforts had only made the crashes worse. Her economic models sat in databases like ancient prophecies, accurate but incomprehensible to those who needed them most. The Zarian plague had finally burned itself out after killing nearly 50 million beings across 17 star systems. Dr. Helen Martinez's research notes had eventually led to treatments that slowed the disease's spread, but the universal vaccine she had been developing remained beyond the current capabilities of galactic medical science. Her incomplete work served as a painful reminder of how close salvation had been before humanity's departure. On worlds across the galaxy, the infrastructure that humans had built or maintained was slowly failing. Terraforming systems collapsed on 12 planets, forcing mass evacuations that created refugee crises nobody was prepared to handle. Atmospheric processors that engineer Mary Johnson had designed with elegant efficiency became expensive disasters when local technicians tried to repair them with crude modifications that disrupted their delicate balance. The most successful salvage operations were led by species that had paid attention to human methods and learned from their approaches. The Centauri Union had managed to maintain most of their human-built infrastructure by carefully studying archived training materials and following procedures exactly as documented. Their willingness to admit they didn't understand the technology had saved them from the catastrophic failures that plagued prouder species. Environmental scientist Daniel Wright's monitoring networks continued to function automatically, but without his expertise to interpret the warnings, ecological disasters struck with increasing frequency. 3 ocean worlds had lost their marine ecosystems to pollution buildups that Daniel's systems had detected months before they became critical. His automated alerts were ignored or misunderstood by local authorities who couldn't grasp the complex interactions he had been managing. The criminal syndicate that Detective Kate Foster had been tracking completed their plans for galactic destabilization. Governments fell on 7 worlds as the syndicate's carefully placed agents triggered coups and revolutions that appeared spontaneous but were actually orchestrated with military precision. Kate's abandoned investigation files revealed the scope of the conspiracy, but by then it was too late to prevent the criminals from seizing control of key trade routes. Archaeological treasures continued to disappear from sites across the galaxy. Emma Stone's protective networks had collapsed completely, leaving ancient ruins vulnerable to treasure hunters and industrial exploitation. The Museum of Galactic Heritage estimated that 20% of known archaeological sites had been damaged or destroyed since humanity's departure. Irreplaceable cultural artifacts from extinct civilizations were being sold on black markets, while their historical context was lost forever. Deep space exploration teams began reporting strange discoveries in the regions beyond the galactic rim. Long-range sensors detected massive artificial structures that seemed to be growing larger over time. The energy signatures were unlike anything in known technology, but they had characteristics that reminded experts of human engineering principles. Whatever humanity had found in the void between galaxies, they were apparently building something extraordinary. The most unsettling reports came from the very edge of explored space. Survey ships found abandoned monitoring stations that had been built recently but were already more advanced than anything the current galaxy could produce. The designs were recognizably human in their elegant efficiency, but the technology was decades ahead of what humanity had shown during their time in galactic society. It appeared that freed from the constraints and criticism of galactic politics, human innovation had accelerated beyond all expectations. Captain Naltash of the exploration vessel Farseeker discovered a derelict human research station in an uncharted system. The station was empty but functional, filled with experimental equipment that no species in the galaxy could have built. Most disturbing were the notes left behind, written in human languages, but describing scientific principles that seemed to bend the laws of physics. The humans hadn't just left the galaxy, they had apparently transcended it. The discovery that shook the Council most deeply came from a deep space monitoring array on the frontier. The array had detected a transmission that originated from beyond the galactic rim and was broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously. The message was brief and clearly human in origin, though it took weeks for the translation computers to decode the complex mathematical language it used. When the translation was complete, Council Speaker Vexthara read it to a nearly empty chamber. Most of the remaining delegates had gone home to deal with their own crises, leaving only a handful of representatives to hear humanity's final message to the galaxy they had left behind. To the Galactic Council and all species within, the message began. We hope this transmission finds you well and learning to work together. We want you to know that we bear no anger toward any of you. Our departure was not motivated by revenge or spite, but by the simple recognition that our help was no longer wanted or needed. We have found something wonderful beyond the rim of known space, and we are building a new kind of civilization based on cooperation rather than competition. We hope that someday you will learn the value of working together instead of working against each other. The galaxy is yours now. Please take care of it. And remember that the greatest strength of any civilization is not its technology or military might, but its willingness to help others without expecting anything in return. The transmission ended with coordinates for a location so far beyond the galactic rim that reaching it would require technology that wouldn't be developed for centuries. It was humanity's way of saying goodbye forever, while leaving the door open for a reunion. That might happen long after every current member of the council had turned to dust. Vexthara sat alone in the empty chamber after the other delegates had left, staring at Jake Harrison's statue and wondering what the galaxy might have been if they had simply said, "Thank you," more often. The humans were gone, pursuing wonders beyond imagination in the vast darkness between galaxies, and the council was left to govern a civilization that was slowly learning to regret its own ingratitude.